Well, to your points, I remember in 2015, I had this moment. I've been watching China basically for that was my focus for years, right? And I'm watching the American media, and there's, by the way, the media, you really state propaganda in China, right? It's all kind of centralized. The talking points are spread out, and it just functions a certain way. There's certain patterns. You watch it for a while, you see those patterns. In 2015, I think our media in America went crazy. That's what I saw. Like I said
2015?
2015. This was like basically post kind of Trump announcing his candidacy and this sort of all these narratives starting to build and these changes. You actually put your finger on it, Tim, that these changes in how the programming worked, right? And I started watching and I was like, wait a sec, this is working like the Chinese media. I'm not talking about CNN specifically. I'm talking about broadly, across many media. And this was the part that was bizarre to me, because over there's the Xinhua, propaganda agency basically controlling everything. Who's controlling everything here, right? But somehow everybody knew what the narratives were supposed to be. It was the weirdest thing. And that's where we suddenly, at Epoch Times became weird and odd, because we were just doing something different, right? Which was just being truth-seeking, right? So something really changed in 2015, I think.
It seemed like they wanted Hillary in so bad into the office, and then her email scandal appeared, and the media just this is like, okay, this is an opportunity to break one of the biggest stories of the 21st century. This is huge. Hillary Clinton, 10,000 plus emails of her working with Sidney Blumenthal to get us into Libya, like so much incriminating. And it was like silence and it was silence, and it was like a coordinated silence. I sensed it too. I just didn't realize, I didn't see the correlation between that and Chinese state propaganda. Mm-hmm. What do you think is like the Council on Foreign Relations is related to the coordinating? Like AT&T owns CNN. So, like, at what point are these corporations coming up to, like, a group of, like, 6 dudes getting together and being like, I'm going to have my media organizations run this story on Tuesday. And they're like, well, we'll do it on Wednesday.
Well, they had something called the Journo list. So it's Journo-L list. Clever. And I was actually on some of these things. These were Facebook communities and email groups where all of the New York media would be in an email chain or like a forum. Someone would post news, they would all see it, and then everyone would write it. So this created this weird narrative collusion. I actually think people underestimate how much this turned media into rage bait garbage nonsense and pulled the media class outside of America. So when you have people who only get their news from each other, they're sitting in a room talking to each other. I'll tell you this. Look at Australia. Got a bunch of really weird critters over there, huh? Why? They have endemic species. Because of the separation of the land masses, evolution took a different path there versus another place. That's the easiest way to understand what happens to these news organizations. You take a bunch of these journalists, separate them from regular mainstream Americans, and put them in a room, and they will evolve their perspective and narrative dramatically away from where regular Americans are. Now, all of a sudden, you get moderates voting for Donald Trump who are like, I think America should have factories here. I agree with Bernie Sanders on not having the borders wide open. And then all of a sudden they're like, that's far right. Bernie Sanders gets swept up in the same thing. It eventually starts spreading. It goes to social media, and then Twitter creates, they take this weird mutant worldview from these newsrooms, spread it out all over Twitter, and now it's starting to spread everywhere. So I've actually had this conversation with Peter Boghossian, one of the guys who did one of the people who did the Sokol Squared hoax, where they took Mein Kampf and then turned it into a feminist journal, and then it got submitted in, whatever. And his argument was all of this stuff started in the colleges, and I disagree with that. I believe it started in media and social media. I certainly believe a lot of these ideas, wokeness, critical race theory, and all that stuff did start in colleges. But my argument is it was only when social media and these New York digital publishing firms, blogs, became prominent that these ideas skyrocketed in the LexisNexis database, appearing in the New York Times. And so when people say, yeah, but the ideas originate in universities, I say a lot of ideas are in universities, but this is the only one that expanded out of it. So when you can highlight a handful of academics with crazy ideas, well, there's probably 3,000 more academics with crazy ideas that are not cultural, Marxism or whatever. But when you get these people at big tech firms, we're on these journalist forums who are using social media algorithms to pump out as many keywords as possible, you get this warped, broken cult. And it's expanding. And the crazy thing is, back in 2012, 2013, when we started seeing Gamergate start. So many people thought these were just creepy weirdos. Now, we did a member segment the other day about tulpas and mind alters, people who they're suffering from some kind of social psychosis. So these are people who believe they have multiple people in their heads. And they make TikTok videos where they're like, one girl's like, I am a doll, I forget to breathe, and like these really weird behaviors. It's a social contagion that's emerging from this, and we're watching it happen in real time. That's not out of universities. That's from what the media is doing, and journalists are wrapped up in it all the same.
So where you're saying the Chinese top-down, what'd you call the
Xinhua
organization is coordinating the media, that you think that there's more of an emergent phenomenon as well, where like people are saying, hey, that worked on CNN, let's run it on Fox. Hey, that worked on MSNBC, let's run it. Although there might be a group of like top-down oligarchs also doing it. We don't have any evidence for it.
That was my conclusion. Well, I think there's certain opinion leaders. Okay, definitely. I mean, there was a time when, basically the New York Times set the news agenda for the day, and everyone just looked at it. And the New York Times, I mean, talk to anyone that worked in those newsrooms. They were aware of the fact that was their job, and that was their right, to kind of do that, right? Of course, that the whole sort of explosion of blogs and everything took that away from them, or at least to some extent, right?
Well, so I have talked about this quite a bit, but I'll just try to make it quick. When you share an article with, Kamala Harris in the headline, people who are interested in Kamala Harris are fed that through the algorithm. If you have a headline that says Kamala Harris, Jussie Smollett, now you're getting both groups, Group X and Group Y, the Jussie Smollett fans and the Kamala fans, and it becomes exponential. So what happened was in the late 2000s, early 2010s, these blogs, Mike.com is a great example because they were pro Ron Paul initially. Why? Well, the Ron Paul love revolution was very popular online. But what started working better was anti-police brutality, racism, and general wokeness. So this is back in 2010 or 11. They started shifting from a libertarian internet perspective into wokeness, because when you make a headline that says like trans women of color fighting for Black Lives Matter against police brutality are the strength against white supremacy or whatever, you have all of those keywords crammed in that headline. Facebook feeds it to way more people. All of a sudden now intersectionality started rising, and from that we end up now in a whole world where we have members of Congress who are in this cult who believe things that quite literally make no sense.
Yeah. I would argue those who control the algorithms control the minds of the people, and I think that's very evident with a lot of the agenda that has been achieved through manipulation of the perception of everyone's reality. And you could very easily shape that by showing them certain events and denying them other events, talking about certain set of facts, denying other certain amount of facts, having these echo chambers that constantly regurgitate the same amount of news to people, so they double down, triple down on their political positions. But I wanted to ask you, Jan, specifically, there's a lot of people talking about what's happening now in reference to the Cultural Revolution in China. Do you think that's a fair, accurate depiction, and do you have any examples of how that might be related?
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's a fantastic question. I've had a number of people on the show on American Thought Leaders talking about this specifically. One woman named She Van Fleet. So she kind of came into prominence in Loudoun County. She was one of those parents that came up and spoke and said, I was actually part of the Cultural Revolution. I was there. Right. And so it's actually a really thoughtful interview. Right. Because, because people will say, well, there isn't, mass killings or something like that. Well, that's true. Right. But the way that language was manipulated, right? The way that basically the way the censorship works. There's a whole series of, I guess, the kind of cultural elements, right, that aren't that don't have to do with the actual killing, compelling people to behave a particular way, everyone being afraid if I don't join this sort of performance art, this performative behavior, right? When I looked at those tweets earlier, whenever I see that stuff, I think, these people are basically virtue signaling to their base, so to speak. Yes, I'm on board with you. That's really what it says. It's not really saying I think this is true or something like that. And this is all very much exactly from the Cultural Revolution. This is what She Van Fleet talked about.
And what about the releasing of criminals? Was that something that occurred during the communist takeover?
No, so absolutely. So it's we have a series that it's actually very interesting. It's called the 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party, right? And this was written by our Chinese edition for Chinese. Millions millions of Chinese have read it. It's a true history of communism in China. One of the chapters, and there's a better translation, but originally it was kind of translated in the first version I saw as we were editing it, unleashing the scum of society, okay? Mm-hmm. And actually, this is what people do in the communist system. They take the people who have, who are cluster B, psychopaths, all this kind of stuff, and you let them loose on society, because you basically let them do their thing and create the chaos, right? And sort of break the system so that you can recreate your utopia after it. It's just part of the game.
And if you're a capitalist or a landowner or a business owner, they literally put you in the middle of the square, start shaving your head, embarrassing you, and try to emasculate you and dehumanize you in front of everyone. One of the scariest parallels when it comes to the Cultural Revolution that I see now is the centralization of power, the centralization of our economy, and the pure mismanagement of just the food industry and the trade industry. And I think there's a lot of parallels right now when it comes to the centralization of that here in the United States that are terrifying.
And scientism, like this idea that there's the science, here's the perspective. Like, science is not one perspective. It never was, never will be, right? But that's how it's playing out here. That's crazy, right?
The trope in our media is typically that doing something for science was viewed as like a negative. There'd be like a mad scientist and he'd be experimenting on someone. He'd be like, I must do this for science. And it was like a villainous response to why they must carry it out. It was showing you to be inhuman. Now, you have people who come out and say the science when they really mean the establishment narrative. Because the science has never settled. It's the weirdest thing for them to say that. I mean, I'm sure Galileo would...
Science is Dr. Fauci. Yeah, Tim, please have a correction for our tech overlords, and please forgive us. Fauci is science.
Is he settled?
I could not believe that interview. By the way, I was like...
He said it more than once.
Twice.
Yeah. He said he was the science twice. Yeah. He's not. He's a guy. And he gets things wrong a lot.
But it's just so much not any... I mean, my background, I'm an evolutionary biologist, but that's my background, right? Like, this, you can't say that. That's just nothing to do with science ever, right?
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.